Hello my friends, welcome to Bomb Anime and Games Initiation Zone. So, for today, I'm going to have to provide a few spoilers for this little show right here, Magica. Then again, I'm pretty sure most of you out there have already seen this anime, so no problem there, I'd imagine. Because today, we're going to be continuing my little Villains Appreciation Month by taking a look at a baddie from this anime, who just happens to be an acquaintance of my current house guest, who I'm sure has a really good relationship with.
He's a jerk-off who still owes me for giving him the location to this planet full of angsty teen girls. You have any idea how awkward it is to be asked that kind of stuff?
In case you couldn't tell by the description, I'm of course talking about Kyubey. Last year at my local anime convention, one of the guest speakers was none other than Kyubey's English voice actress, Cassandra Morris. At one of her panels, she made the argument that Kyubey wasn't actually a villain, but misunderstood. As much as I respect the good Miss Morris, especially after she put up with 4Kids crappy scripts during her early years, I have to humbly disagree with her. I understand that she was making that argument as a means of defending Kyubey, but I don't think that was necessary at all, because I think that viewing him as a villain made him one of the most fascinating characters in the anime. Now don't get me wrong, Madoka will always be number one in my books, but just on the basis of pure analysis, I find him and Homura to be the most interesting characters to research and take apart. Which, now that I think about it, since we are talking about villains this month... yeah, let's save that for another day. I mean, give people time to at least watch the rebellion story and all that. Instead, let's just focus on the evil bunny thing and what makes him such an effective and creepy as all hell baddie. Let's start off by establishing Kyubey and his purpose in the story. At first, Kyubey seems like your typical magical girl mascot character. You know, that little creature that exists mostly so that the marketing team has something else to sell. Then in to give the girls their transformation trinkets, again something else to sell, to fight the forces of evil. In the world of Madoka Magica, that evil is supposedly the witches. Hey, perfect for the Halloween theme. But anyway, after granting them a wish of anything they desire, Kyubey provides them with their transformation trinkets and asks them to fight these creatures spawned from Tim Burton's fever dreams. Which, when you really stop and think about it, all these fairies and whatnot are also kind of selfish little jerks who are asking young girls to enlist in their war to reclaim their kingdoms or something along those lines. Kyubey in particular tends to leave out a few key details about becoming a magical girl in their universe, like the fact that the transformation trinkets he provides, the soul gems, also happen to house their actual souls. That's right, he pulls out people's souls all Shang Tsung and then stuffs them into these little Fabergé egg things. Should the gem be destroyed or moved at least 100 meters away from the owner, they'll essentially die as their bodies become lifeless and slowly start to decompose unless maintained by magic. Yeah, looks like we got into the horror part of this analysis, didn't we? Though believe me, it actually gets worse. Yeah, as it turns out, over time the soul gems start to turn black, meaning that the girls' souls are also turning pitch black. As a result, they start to suffer from severe cases of depression and eventually fall into full-on despair. Oh my god, no one tell Junko and Ishima about these things. Because, you see, once the girls fully submit to their despair, they actually become witches. Yeah, they end up becoming the horrifying eldritch abominations they were hunting, essentially creating an endless cycle of death and despair. And again, this was all perpetrated by the cat or rabbit thing, I don't know what he is exactly. Again, while I understand Cassandra Morris wanting to defend the character she plays, I really can't agree with her viewpoint that he's not bad and just misunderstood when you consider the many moral evils he's committing by intentionally leaving out such important details. So why did he pull off all this crap? Well, in his own words, it's to prevent the heat death of the universe, which I'm not really an authority on. It's really complicated science. Say, Anti-Man, you're smart. You think you could explain it,
You're on your own!
Okay, I'll give a very basic sum up, I guess.
The heat death of the universe is the theoretical end of the universe in which, due to the infinite expansion of the universe, energy loss will occur due to entropy. Again, I'm not an authority on this stuff. If you're curious, please do your own research. The point is, Kyubey is trying to prevent such an occurrence by gathering energy from a source that is exempt from the laws of entropy, which is apparently produced when a magical girl becomes a witch. So, let me just get this straight. The power of angst is one of the greatest in the universe as it is created from nothing physical. Maybe that's why it's so overused in fiction these days. Still, unlike villains like, say, Darkseid or Thanos, Kyubey isn't seeking to conquer anyone or create havoc, and he does honestly want to save the universe, which is all nice and everything. Only problem is, he still ruins just as many lives as those two through the many magical girls he contracts, and the collateral damage caused by the witches. Now, some could say Kyubey is going by the whole the needs of the few outweigh the needs of the many sort of philosophy, though unlike the good Mr. Spock, he's sacrificing the lives of many unwilling individuals. Spock went in to fix the reactor knowing full well he was more than likely going to die, but was willing to do it because he wanted to save his friends. Meanwhile, Kyubey purposely seeks out young girls who are in a position where they would more than likely make an impulsive choice, either because they're under a lot of stress or simply too naive to realize the risks involved. And like many of those impulsive choices that, face it, we've all made, they ended up regretting the commitments they weren't completely ready for, which is exactly what Kyubey wants, as it speeds up the witchification process. Granted, this might not have been the case for every girl he contracted, but it certainly was the case for the main characters of this anime. When you realize that some of these girls were too young to even fully grasp the concepts of life and death, then their sacrifices start to sound a little less noble, don't they? Now, if Cassandra was trying to make the argument that we shouldn't be afraid of Kyubey as he isn't totally malicious, I might partially agree with her. He's certainly not a sociopath like Light Yagami from last time, as he's not doing this for the sake of satisfying his own ego, but the problem is that he might have an even greater lack of empathy than Light. I think one of the villains Kyubey relates with the most is probably the HAL 9000. Along with having the same dead red eyes, both were beings who prioritized their missions more than anything else. As such, they felt nothing when killing off those who had agreed to help them in their missions. They're both examples of what happens when only logic is brought to the table, and any bit of humanity and remorse is disregarded. Going back to that Spock example for a minute, the Vulcans in general always claim to be a race that runs entirely on logic, but even they show signs of having actual emotions similar to us Earthlings. Kyubey and Hal, on the other hand, rarely show any kind of emotions in any of their mannerisms and thus come off as just cold and calculated. In Hal's case, it's kind of understandable since he doesn't have a face, but Kyubey does, and it never ever changes, except in the manga, which for some reason he has a lot of facial expressions, which kind of ruins the subtlety of his character in my opinion. Because really, having no real emotions most of the time makes Kyubey an incredibly creepy and unsettling character. He almost always keeps the same tone in his voice and the same amount of detachment for the situation. In one timeline, his actions actually led to the end of all life on Earth, and he just shrugged it off and said he was going to move on to his next planet to harvest more energy from. In my last video, I mentioned that we're afraid of the unknown because we don't know how to cope with it. While many of us are unfamiliar with sociopaths like Light Yagami who have a bizarre emotional range, I think we're even more unfamiliar with those who have almost none to begin with. But again, I don't want to make it sound like I dislike these aspects of his character. I think it all works to making him one of the most effective villains in anime today. After all, it's rare when you have a villain who could say they doomed their victims while barely lifting a finger, as said victims did at least part of the work. Really, it's all part of just being a representation of one of the greatest villains of all time. What do I mean by this? Well, at a Q&A panel for Animagic 2013, Gen Urobuchi, the writer of Mononoke Magica, was quoted as saying that main inspirations for his works are Aero games and classical literature. Normally, I'd ask how those two media can congeal, but this is the guy who wrote Fate Zero, he knows what he's doing. In that same interview, while he didn't realize it until somebody pointed it out, he ended up incorporating a lot of the German legend of Faust into his screenplay, in particular Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's version. For those unfamiliar, Faust was a scholar who sold his soul to the devil in exchange for unlimited knowledge and worldly possessions. In Goethe's play, Faust made the pact with the devil's representative, Mephistopheles, aka Mephisto, who managed to work his way into his sight by taking on the form of a pool that followed him home. So, Mephisto took on the form of a cute little animal in order to catch Faust off guard, and then offered him a deal that would grant him his wishes, but would eventually damn him to a fate worse than death. Sound familiar? Yep. Kyubey is an XP for Mephisto. Gotta say, he's a much better interpretation of the character than the guy who arguably ruined Spider-Man comics for many. Now granted, Faust is a legend that has become the basis for a lot of literature and cinema, hence where the term Faustian comes from. In fact, Kamen Rider Ryuki, which Urobuchi didn't have any part in but did draw a lot of inspiration from, also had a similar character who taught people desperate enough to want their wishes granted into fighting in a war which they would more than likely die in. However, the entirety of Madoka Magica ended up having a lot more connections with the legend than even that show. We'll get more into detail about that in a future video, but the point is, Kyubey is a surprisingly subtle yet blatant recreation of quite possibly the most well-known devil in all fiction. Quite befitting for a creature who perceives human suffering as a necessary means to an end.
My advice to anyone out there who happens to stumble upon a cute little animal like Kyubey, be careful. Get to know him very well, because you never know when or how the devil is going to appear next. Of course, for me, I know my cute little buddies are perfectly safe and harmless. Isn't that right, guys? Buddha? Baby, could you... Wait, baby! I got cheese in the fridge! You don't have to eat Buddha!